This story has haunted me for years, and it's one I'll never forget. My grandmother swore by it until the day she died. It's hard to say exactly why it stuck with me, but I guess it's because it's the kind of thing that makes you believe there's something more to life than we can see. Something bigger. Something we can't explain. It was during the war in London. My dad was just a baby, and the world was anything but normal. Bombs fell, people panicked, and nothing seemed safe. My grandmother, let's call her Nanny, had already been through enough. She was one of the many people displaced from their homes, forced to stay with a friend. The war didn't care who you were or what you had. It only cared about destruction. But then, things started to get weird. My dad was a small baby, and Nanny, as any grandmother would, kept a very close eye on him. But one night, as she was carrying him upstairs to bed, something happened. Something that made her change her entire night. And in doing so, it changed the course of my dad's life, too. So, Nanny had this friend, a woman who took her in when she had nowhere to go. The friend didn't have much either, but she offered what she could. They lived in a house that was nothing fancy but still felt like a safe haven amidst the chaos. Nanny was staying with her for a while, taking refuge from the bombings. The friend was kind enough to offer her a room upstairs, a small, quiet space tucked away at the top of the house. It was late one evening. Nanny was carrying my dad up the stairs to put him to bed. You know, the routine, little baby, cozy blankets, a bit of quiet time before the exhaustion of the day settled in. But as she made her way up those stairs, something caught her attention. There, standing halfway up the staircase, was a figure. It wasn't exactly a person, but a presence. Something she couldn't quite put her finger on. The figure didn't say anything at first, but then, it spoke. "You shouldn't sleep in that room tonight," it said, its voice low and firm. Now, if you're like me, the first thought that crosses your mind is probably something along the lines of, "That's insane. What kind of warning is that?" But Nanny wasn't a woman to brush things off, not in times like these. The war had already shaken her to her core. But this felt different. Without hesitation, Nanny nodded back up the stairs. She didn't question it. She didn't argue. She just knew. Without a second thought, Nanny turned around and headed back down the stairs. It's hard to explain the feeling, but she felt this deep, instinctive pull to do exactly what the figure, whatever it was, had suggested. Maybe it was the way it spoke. Maybe it was the weight of the war that already made her second-guess everything. Or maybe it was just pure, unexplainable gut instinct. She found her friend in the living room and told her, "We're not sleeping in that room tonight. We'll stay here." The friend looked at her, confused and a little annoyed. After all, it was her home, and it was getting late. But my grandmother wasn't one to back down, especially when it came to my dad's safety. "We're sleeping in the living room," Nanny said firmly. Her friend didn't understand, but she agreed. Maybe out of politeness, maybe out of respect for Nanny, or maybe she just didn't argue when it was clear my grandmother wasn't going to budge. But in hindsight, the weirdness of it all was lost on the friend. It didn't seem like something worth making a fuss over at the time. They moved the crib, settled on the couch, and prepared for an uneventful night. But that night was far from normal. The night was eerily quiet, which, in a way, made it all the more unsettling. It was like the calm before the storm. Everyone huddled together, trying to sleep despite the knowledge that the war raged on outside. The house creaked under the weight of uncertainty, and the faint sounds of distant explosions were a constant reminder that danger could strike at any moment. Nanny tried to drift off to sleep with my dad in her arms, but the unease never fully left her. Something told her that this night would be different, though she couldn't explain why. And then, it happened. A deafening explosion shook the house, a violent tremor that sent everything into chaos. The walls rattled. The windows shattered. The noise was so intense that it felt like the ground itself had cracked open. Nanny felt the air leave her lungs as the shockwave hit. And in that split second, before her mind even had a chance to process what was happening, she realized the roof above them caved in. It was like the entire structure of the house just collapsed inward. The very room where she had been about to lay my dad down to sleep. It was gone. Everything above them, destroyed. The crib, the bed, the small space that had been meant to be a safe haven for my dad, everything was crushed under the rubble. My heart stops just thinking about it. If Nanny hadn't listened to that strange, otherworldly warning, my dad wouldn't have stood a chance. The explosion left a stunned silence in its wake. For a moment, Nanny couldn't breathe, couldn't even comprehend what had just happened. The house had been ripped apart, the once safe walls now a heap of broken timbers and debris. But as the dust settled and the echoes of the blast faded, one thing became glaringly clear. She was alive. And my dad was alive. She had held him so tightly against her chest during the explosion that he barely stirred. His tiny body was shielded by her own, and by some miracle, they had survived the collapse. It was nothing short of a miracle. But the shock, the adrenaline, the flood of emotions that hit her all at once, it was overwhelming. She wanted to scream, to cry, to shout in disbelief at what had just transpired. But at the same time, she was filled with a quiet sense of awe. The figure on the stairs, the warning, all of it suddenly made sense. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't just some figment of imagination. It was real. Her friend, who had been in a different part of the house, came rushing in. She was shaken, of course, but unharmed. The house was in ruins, but they had somehow escaped the worst of it. "Are you okay?" the friend asked, her voice trembling. Nanny could barely respond. All she could do was look at the destruction around them, then glance down at my dad, still asleep in her arms. That's when it hit her. Had she not listened, had she not trusted that strange warning, my dad wouldn't be here. She couldn't help but whisper a prayer of gratitude under her breath. It was the only thing she could do in that moment of shock. In the hours that followed the bombing, things moved quickly. Neighbors rushed in to help, and rescue teams arrived not long after. The dust was thick in the air, and it felt like the whole world was still reeling from the blast. But amid the chaos, Nanny couldn't stop thinking about that moment on the stairs, about the figure, about the warning that had saved their lives. She kept telling herself it was just luck, that it was coincidence. Maybe she had overreacted. Maybe she was just being overly cautious, and it didn't really mean anything. But deep down, she knew. She felt it. It wasn't a fluke. Her friend, still reeling from the shock, couldn't understand. "You could have just been lucky," she said, shaking her head as they sat amidst the wreckage. "I don't know, maybe you just moved the crib and it would have been fine anyway." But Nanny wasn't having it. "No," she said quietly, her voice firm despite the exhaustion. "It wasn't luck. Something told me to listen. And I did." Even though no one else could see it, she knew the truth. She had been guided in that moment, somehow, by something beyond herself. It wasn't just the survival of her and my dad, it was the certainty that they had been protected for a reason. The war had taken so much from so many, but for Nanny, that night felt like a sign. A sign that there was something out there watching over them. As the days passed, the house was cleared of debris, and life, though scarred by the bombing, began to return to some semblance of normalcy. But Nanny's mind couldn't stop racing. Everyone around her was talking about how lucky they had been, how miraculous it was that they survived the bombing. Yet, there was something gnawing at her, something she couldn't quite shake. Despite everything she'd experienced, part of her still questioned the reality of it all. Was it really a warning? Was it just coincidence? Could it have all been in her head? It was hard to reconcile what she knew in her heart with the harsh reality around her. When she talked to her friend about it again, her friend seemed almost relieved to dismiss it. "It was just a bad night, Nanny. Don't overthink it. You did what any mother would do in a panic. You just moved him, that's all." Nanny didn't argue, but inside, she felt something different. The words of the figure on the stairs lingered with her, echoing in her mind as if the very air was trying to communicate something to her. The feeling was too strong to ignore. Too real. Still, doubt crept in, because how could she explain it? How could she make anyone else understand? People want answers, and the truth was, there was no way to explain the inexplicable. There was no logic to it, no scientific explanation that could make sense of what had happened. But sometimes, there's a part of you that knows, beyond reason, that some things simply don't need explaining. Even though the war raged on, and my dad grew into a toddler, then a young boy, and eventually a man, Nanny never stopped remembering that night. The bombing and the warning never left her. It became a part of her, woven into the very fabric of her life. She often told the story to anyone who would listen, but as time went on, people started to brush it off as just a piece of wartime folklore, something to cling to when things felt too heavy to bear. But not to Nanny. To her, it was as real as the air she breathed. It wasn't just a story. It was the truth, and she swore by it until the day she died. There wasn't a single day that went by that she didn't reflect on that moment. And as I grew older, she told me the story more than once, each time with the same sense of certainty, the same feeling of awe. It's funny how people can change after an event like that. For Nanny, it wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about understanding that some things in life are beyond our control, but that doesn't mean we're alone in facing them. There's something out there that guides us, that looks after us when we need it the most, even in the most impossible circumstances. As much as I appreciated the story, there was a part of me that never fully believed it. I mean, who could? It was so out there, so strange. But as I got older, I started to wonder. I started to feel the weight of it. Years passed, and life moved on. Nanny grew older, and eventually, my dad grew into a man with his own family and his own life. The story of that night faded into the background for most people, just another thing in a long list of wartime memories. But not for me. I began to reflect on what Nanny had said, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that something had shifted inside me. I didn't just want to believe in the story. I needed to. Because what if, just maybe, there was something more to it? What if there was more to this world than what we can see, touch, and measure? The older I got, the more I realized that I felt that same odd sense of unease sometimes. There were moments when I would get this strange feeling, like something was warning me, guiding me, whispering in the back of my mind. It wasn't always clear, but it was there. A nudge, a sense that I should listen, that I should pay attention. I've had my own share of close calls in life. We all have, right? Times when things could have gone one way, but they didn't. The wrong place at the wrong time, but somehow, you walk away unscathed. And every time it happened, I couldn't help but wonder if there was something or someone watching over me. Just like my dad all those years ago. I didn't want to admit it at first. It felt silly, like I was grasping at straws, clinging to some childhood fantasy. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized, maybe Nanny wasn't crazy. Maybe she had seen something that I couldn't. One evening, not long ago, something happened that really made me question everything. I was driving home from work, the road slick with rain, and the usual thoughts were buzzing through my head. It was just another day until I took a turn that I normally wouldn't have. Something made me veer off course. I can't explain it. Maybe it was a fleeting thought or a gut feeling telling me to take the long way home, but I did it. I didn't question it. It wasn't even a conscious decision. And wouldn't you know it, minutes after I turned, I heard sirens and saw the flashing lights of an emergency vehicle in my rearview mirror. A few miles up the road, a massive wreck had just happened. It was bad, like one of those situations where you think, if I had been there just a few minutes earlier. But I wasn't. I wasn't caught up in it. I took the other route. And I could have sworn, as I drove by the wreckage, that the feeling I had was the same one I had gotten when I heard Nanny's story. It was like a warning. Something had guided me, somehow. I thought back to that night she told me the story again, how she had said that sometimes you don't know why you listen to certain things, but you do. And it works out. Maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe I was overthinking it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this world than we can ever understand. The same feeling Nanny must have had all those years ago. It's funny how life has a way of showing you things when you least expect it. After that night, I couldn't ignore the reality of what had happened. I didn't need an explanation. I didn't need anyone to tell me that it was just a coincidence. I knew in my gut that there was something to it. And slowly, but surely, I began to embrace it. The nagging doubts, the need for logic and reason, those things started to fade away. In their place, something else grew. A sense of peace, of quiet acceptance. Maybe we don't always need to understand everything. Maybe we're not supposed to. Some things just are. For the first time, I truly understood why Nanny swore by that story. Why it stuck with her. Because after all those years, after the dust settled and everything went back to normal, she still knew in her heart that something had been looking out for them that night. And maybe, just maybe, something was still watching over us now. I didn't share this with many people, of course. It's not the kind of thing you can easily explain, and I didn't feel like I had to. But there was a quiet shift in me, a recognition that there are forces at work in the world that we may never fully understand, and that's okay. I didn't need all the answers. I just needed to trust that things happen for a reason, even if we can't see it at the time. Years passed, and life continued, as it always does. My dad grew older, and though he never fully understood what had happened that night, how he'd nearly been crushed by that bomb, how Nanny had saved him with a simple act of listening to a strange warning, he never forgot the story. It became a part of who he was, woven into the very foundation of his life. And even though he didn't talk about it often, I saw the way it affected him. I saw the way he always took extra precautions, the way he'd listen to that little voice inside him when it whispered that something wasn't right. Maybe, just like Nanny, he couldn't explain why he trusted those instincts, but he did. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a legacy. I realized that the warning wasn't just about surviving that one night. It was about something deeper, something more profound. It was about the importance of listening to the signs in life, the ones that come when you least expect them. The world doesn't always speak to us in clear words or rational explanations. Sometimes, it speaks in ways we don't understand. And maybe that's the point. Maybe it's not about understanding everything, but about trusting, even when we don't have all the answers. And as I look back now, I think about my own kids, about the life lessons I'll pass on to them. One of the most important lessons I want them to learn is this: listen. Listen when the world speaks to you, whether it's through a feeling, a gut instinct, or a quiet whisper in the back of your mind. Sometimes, those voices are all you need to stay safe, to avoid a danger you didn't see coming. It wasn't until years after Nanny passed away that something strange happened. I was cleaning out some old boxes in the attic, boxes full of family memories, photos, and keepsakes that had been tucked away for years. I stumbled across a dusty, weathered envelope tucked inside one of the boxes. I opened it, curious, and inside was a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable, it was Nanny's. But what was more startling was the date on the letter. It was written just a few months before she passed. The letter itself was short, but it held a weight that felt too heavy for just paper and ink. It was a reflection of her thoughts, a sort of final message. She talked about the bombing, about that night, and how she always knew there was something watching over them. But then, she mentioned something I had never heard her say before. She wrote, "There is a presence in the world that guides us, whether we see it or not. It's not always clear, but it's there, and we have to trust it." I've spent my whole life wondering if I was just imagining things, but now I know it wasn't just the war that brought me to that moment, it was something bigger. Something more powerful. And I think, after everything I've seen, I'm finally ready to understand what it is. She didn't finish the thought, and I didn't know exactly what she meant. But in that moment, reading those words, I felt a deep sense of peace. It was as if she had finally found the answer she had been searching for all her life. And in a strange way, it felt like she was passing that wisdom on to me. It wasn't about understanding the why, it was about trusting, about knowing that there's something more to this life than we can grasp. I folded the letter and tucked it back into the envelope, my hands trembling slightly. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that quiet certainty deep inside me. I understood. Maybe we'll never fully understand the forces that guide us, but we don't need to. We just have to trust that they're there. As I sat there in the attic, holding Nanny's letter, I realized that I had reached a place of understanding I never expected. There was a calm in knowing that some questions would never have clear answers. Some things in life happen without any explanation, and perhaps that's okay. Nanny had spent her life looking for meaning, for signs, for validation, but in the end, she had found peace in the uncertainty. I knew then that it was my turn to carry that legacy forward, not just the story of the warning and the bombing, but the lesson behind it. I didn't need to try to explain everything or force meaning where there might be none. What mattered was that we listen to the moments when the world speaks to us, even if it doesn't make sense. I knew I had to share this lesson with my children. I had to tell them the story of Nanny, of the warning, of the mysterious figure on the stairs, and how it had saved my dad's life. But I would also tell them about the bigger truth I had come to understand, that life is full of uncertainties, but there's always something or someone watching over us. And if we're willing to listen and trust, we can find our way. I began telling them the story of that night, of Nanny's unwavering belief, and of the strange and miraculous ways life sometimes works. My kids would ask questions, and sometimes I'd have answers, and other times, I'd tell them, we don't have to understand it all. Just trust it. And when I look at them, I can't help but hope that one day, they'll carry this belief with them too, that even when life feels chaotic, there's always a bigger picture, a greater force at play. As time continues to move forward, I find myself becoming more like Nanny than I ever expected. I've grown to trust those quiet moments of intuition, those feelings that nudge me when I least expect it. And with each passing year, I realize just how much of her story is embedded in who I've become, how much I carry her lessons with me. I've shared the story with friends and family, always with that same quiet certainty that Nanny had. I've even caught myself, at times, listening for that same strange voice or sense of guidance when I find myself at a crossroads or in a moment of uncertainty. Maybe it's just a reminder of what's possible when we stop looking for logical answers and start embracing the mystery of it all. And now, as I sit here, reflecting on everything, on the life I've led, the experiences I've had, and the legacy that continues to shape me, I understand that the story was never just about survival or about the bomb. It was about something deeper, something more spiritual. It was about the bond between generations, the lessons passed down, and the faith in something beyond ourselves. So, to anyone reading this, if there's one piece of advice I could give based on everything I've learned, it's this: listen. Trust that when life whispers to you, whether it's through an unexpected feeling, a strange nudge, or an unexplainable event, there's a reason for it. You may never understand why, and you may never get the answers you expect, but that's okay. Sometimes, just trusting is enough. And I'll always carry Nanny's story with me, as a reminder that life's mysteries are sometimes more profound than we realize, and that in the end, trust and faith in the unseen are what guide us home.